hope at this moment in time, people realize they have the power to change things. We are all shaped by things that happen in our life. What I learned growing up is that while you may have very large negative influences around you, they don't have to define you. Early in my life, when my father abandoned my family, my mother found herself without an education and a job. My mother went back to community college, got a little bit of education, and got a decent job. She said, I'm gonna do something about this, and this is not how the story is going to end. So I saw, hey, no matter how bad it gets, there is always a way forward. I went to university back in the 70s, so at that time you wouldn't have found that many women in engineering. Engineering is really just problem solving, and if you want to do anything meaningful in your life, on a micro scale or a macro scale, you are going to solve a problem, and there are a lot of problems out there. I never started out to be CEO. I just tried to learn as much as I could, and I thought that would always be my ticket to the next thing. I asked lots of questions over and over and over, always willing. I just like a sponge to learn. And in fact, that would be when I hire someone today, I want someone with a great propensity to learn and somebody who just wants to be curious. I never planned to write a book. And then as I started to step down from IBM, a lot of people would say, gosh, you've got to share your experience. I really wanted to share the things that someone could benefit and learn from. They're really all in the aim of showing people how to do things in a really positive way. I believe good power is a choice available to each of us. It acknowledges that the world is full of tensions, it's polarized, divided, but it focuses on how to make progress. And I want people to believe like there's hope. I certainly did not define good power and then go lead with it. It really is a concept that came clear to me when I look back and said, what were the things I saw or that I learned to do that I really admired from other people, and that I am in really the sum part of all of them, because what I saw was the ability to make really hard things happen, but they are done in a positive way. They're done with both your head and your heart. After reading this book, what I hope young professionals get from it is that even though you're starting on your career, it'll be a journey with a lot of pivots, but you have the ability to make big change happen. I hope there's something in it for anybody who wants to drive some societal change. I want them to believe they can and leave an impact, whether it's in your home, your community, but also in the world. Because how you do something might be your greatest legacy.
Please welcome to the stage Stephanie Mehta and Ginni Rometty.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Ginni.
I feel like we just made you watch a commercial. Sorry.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is going to be a great conversation. I'm going to ask Ginni a couple of questions, but I would encourage everybody to submit your questions by going to the South by Southwest Go app and then click on Engage on the event page. And the tool is Slido for those of you who've used it before. It's really easy. You'll be able to upvote your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can before we close the hour. Ginni, I know we just watched your commercial. But I would love it if you could, for this group, tell us what you think good power is.
Okay, well, first, good to see you. Stephanie first interviewed me in 2013, so a decade ago, and we both look better. What do you think? Okay, we're telling each other that. So you saw it in the video, and I'm really careful. I did not say, God, I'm going to write about good power. And it was what I came to retrospectively. And the short answer to it is, for anybody who wants to do hard or meaningful things, even just in their life, but to do them in a good way. Because honestly, I've experienced the best of and the worst of some things in life. And this idea that you can do hard things, yet do them in a positive way, that I always think of 3 words, that is respectful. It doesn't make people afraid or fearful. I think that you should be able to celebrate progress, not perfection, because when everyone wants perfection, I think it polarizes things, and that's a lot of where we're at. And I think the other thing is that it loves tension. I mean, how many people like tension? Okay, well, hopefully by the time I'm done with you, you'll like tension, because I have actually learned to reduce my stress. I would embrace tension. And I think in this world, if you would embrace it, you would make a lot of progress in that, not perfection again, but if you embrace tension, it unites things, it doesn't divide it. I just learned that over and over, the hard way. So that's the idea behind Good Power. And the book is really just meant to be a bunch of tools and tips to help you across your life. And I was so careful to try to write it in a way that would be general, no matter what your job was. You didn't have to be CEO, anybody, in what you were doing. And I really had to reflect it in my own life. And so you'll find it in 3 pieces. It's called The Power of Me, when we're really focused on ourselves. So power to change for yourself. And then the power of us, when we typically start to care about other people, could be family or work. And then the power of we, because I really believe you should not be frustrated with things around you, that we can all make a change in society, which we'll talk about some of all those things.
Well, and I definitely want to come back to this notion of embracing tension, because I think no one in the room raised their hand. And as a leader, I'm rather conflict avoidant, and so I'm really eager to, I'll be taking notes when we get to that section. And I should also mention Ginni is going to be signing copies of the book at 4 o'clock, so please go take a look at the book and go see Ginni. I want to talk with you a little bit about defining power, because you and I came of age in business at a time when people didn't really talk about different kinds of power. You either had it or you didn't. When in your career did it become apparent to you that it was important to start describing a more nuanced approach to power?
Well, I'm going to answer that 2 ways, because you said career. I honestly think part of this, now that I've looked backwards, because again, I said, Steph, at the beginning, I did not intend to write a book. You've known me. You've never heard me talk about writing a book. And so for me, I had to think very hard about this. But what it does is it takes you back in time to look at things. And I only wanted to write a book if I could do it in a way to tell stories that somebody else could learn from, which means you have to tell good and bad stories, right? People are like, well, don't just show me something. I mean, don't just tell me something. I want to feel it, right? So this was a hard thing. So even though Stephanie asked me when did I feel power when I was in career, I do want to go back and say my first time now would clearly have been from my mother. It actually wasn't at work. And my story is probably not too different than, unfortunately, many other people. When I was 16, my father decided he didn't want anything to do with my mother or any of us. I happened to walk in the garage one day. We had just moved. I walked in the house, or in the garage, and I heard him say to my mother, I don't care about you, and I don't care about any of you. You can go work on a street for all I care. And he left, and that was the last. And my mom had no money. We soon have no home. She didn't have an education. She had high school, but never worked. She was, we're going to look at each other. She was 34 years old. So imagine being 34 with 4 kids. And so we went on financial aid and the like. But my mom was so determined that wouldn't be how it ended. Now, I would come to then be also raised by my grandmother and great-grandmother, who equally had tragedies in their lives. Husbands died immediately. One had to clean bathrooms in the Wrigley building, night shift, saved all her money in U.S. savings bonds that would one day save us a car. I mean, so I saw this. And to me, this is not about a victim. So what I realized, because my mom never complained, the first time I saw power was, that was it. I thought, she has power when she has nothing else. And that's like a really profound thought. You have power when you have nothing else. She had the power to change our circumstance. Now, she had to go back to school just a little bit, get a job. A little bit more, a job. A little bit more, a job. Never a degree. And so that would shape in my mind, first off, hard work always gets you out of something. I don't know if everyone believes that. I still believe it to this day. The second thing it would be is that don't ever let someone define who you are. I hope you never do. Only you define. Like my mom was not going to let my dad define her as a victim. You define who you are. I would learn that to be true for companies, countries, in the future days to come. And then the other thing I learned, which I hope we get to talk about, is of course, if I answer my question shorter, we will, this idea that access and aptitude are two different things. Like my mom, she was smart. She just didn't have access to anything. That would begin to color my whole life on how I look at hiring people.
And did you ever hear from your father after you had achieved success in business?
You know, not me directly, but I did see him before he died. And I did that for my sisters. They were going and they wanted me there, so I went. But that was it.
Yeah. You have 5 principles of good power. And again, we're not going to be able to talk about all 5, but what are they, just at a high level?
Okay, so like I said, the book's in 3 parts, and honest, it is storytelling. So it's actually a memoir with purpose. I just don't want to make people afraid, like, oh, this is academic discussion. Because Stephanie and I were just talking about how do you change a business. And so these are 5 principles in retrospective, I'm going to tell you. I did not know them when I was doing, it was always from watching other people, and I thought about what is the best I see out there. And then I tried to generalize them and personalize them just through stories. And so if you want to make any big change, let's say it's your career, I felt the first one is you want to be in service of something, you do not want to serve it. Like we were talking about this with Stephanie is CEO of big magazines and purpose of that. So when you're in service of, okay, how many people have at least gone out to dinner? That may be easier than running detention. Anyone? Oh, okay, my nephew in the front row, okay? It's sweet that he's in the front row, isn't it? Nobody's gone to dinner? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so you go to dinner, you get your food. Does that make it a good night? Nah. Okay, if the waiter, waitress, whoever it is, you can tell the difference, right? They're trying to make sure you have a good evening, whatever that means. So they're trusting, if you have a good evening, they get a big tip. And they just bring you your food. And it's like a simple example, but I think it really illustrates if you are in service of something, not serving it. Ask if your job today or what you do is like that. It's probably easy for your children. I think you probably feel you're in service of your kids. So my first principle was I had to learn how to be in service of something to make it change. The second was then, and I think this is one you do constantly, build belief, which is what Stephanie said, or what I even said in that video commercial. Appeal to someone's head and heart, because you're trying to get people to do things voluntarily that to go to an alternate reality they don't necessarily believe in yet. So it's this idea, second principle is build belief. The third is know what must change and what must endure. I actually think when most people go to change something, they think about everything that changes and they never stop and think about what should endure. Even if it should be modernized. I would learn big lessons on this, particularly during my time as CEO of IBM. And then the fourth one is, okay, all that's great, but if you're going to make big change, I really believe you have to be a steward of good tech, which I know we're going to talk about. I think we are all in tech nowadays. Everybody. I don't care if your company does it or doesn't. Individually, all companies use it. I would love to talk about that. And then the fourth thing is, okay, anything worthwhile to do, is it easy? No, well, maybe in your life, not mine. So I have found is this idea about resilience, and so many people talk about it. I really tried to give tips of how do you really get resilient, because, and God knows, I would go through some of the longest periods. Because whenever you try to do something hard, there are a lot of critics, there are a lot of setbacks. Like I said, there's no straight path to heaven here. And so the idea of resilience to me came from 2 things, relationships and your attitude. I do speak a lot in the book about my husband, which I think people are sort of surprised. He says finally he gets some credit, is what he says. And but, that relationship and that alone would teach me things. Like I had to teach myself, I'm kind of a control freak.
No.
I know. Like I'm controlling this interview right now, okay? So, and I don't want to let go of things, right? And I can remember being on a business trip, because I was traveling a lot, and I came home, and we had finally gotten a house, and he had airjacked a golf course into the basement, into the foundation of the house, which is not good for a foundation of a house. And I walked in, I saw it, I was really ticked off. And he said to me, he said, hey, you got to be present if you want to vote. I said, well, maybe I just really don't care about this that much. And I let it go. But it was like a really powerful lesson that, hey, let go what does not matter. Like, his idea of balancing a checkbook was, within X number, it does not really matter. And I'd be like, no, to the penny. He's like, banks don't make mistakes, Ginni. Well, that's proved to be wrong, but at that point. So I would learn to let go of things. Anyways, relationships and this idea about attitude, which could get to embracing tension, because one of them is run to conflict.
Speaking of conflict, one of the things that you talk about in the Stewarding Good Tech chapter is the instances where you, as CEO of IBM, had to essentially navigate issues that sat at the intersection of business and politics. What were the frameworks you used as an executive to determine how and whether you were going to wade into a political issue?
Okay. So can I do a little survey? We got a big group, and so I'm assuming some of you, maybe you're self-employed or work for someone or work for some place. How many of you think that the company you work for does the right amount of things for social issues, if you might call them social issues? That's really great. And how many don't? Okay, the other half. Okay, so 50-50 roundabout, right?
I'm looking to see if I have any employees out there.
Yeah, I should too, actually. So this idea first came, why I wrote this chapter called Stewarding Good Tech. It probably began to really crystallize for me. It was like 2012. I went and looked up the interview I did with Steph in 2013. Again, back to this preparation thing. And I talked about some of this in that interview, same words even. So at the time, this is like really tech industry, you were talking about it, booming, right? But I could feel this. I called it a digital divide brewing. There were people that were really benefiting, particularly the West Coast and the East Coast of the US, the Midwest. I mean, Austin wasn't what it is today back in 2012. Midwest, not so much. And it was like, okay, there's a lot of people that don't think this future is going to be better for them, good tech. And just, I don't even remember where I made it up. I'm like, I could feel this war, good tech, bad tech. And would start to talk to the whole team about this. And to me, I'll get to this framework. Okay, so politics and all continues to grow. And I found myself being asked to speak out on so many topics. And I said to everybody, Steph asked for about a framework. Like, you can't speak out. Your boss or whoever it is, it's impossible to speak out on every topic that's out there. So I said, look, I'm going to come up with a framework that I think are like at the most critical things to us. I'll speak out on these. I can't do every one, but they live at the intersection of business and technology. I mean, they live at that intersection, and I think that's a really important point. This is not about altruism. And so the first one was trust. I said anything that I think has to do with trust, meaning our trust or people's trust in us, et cetera, okay, I speak out on that. The second thing had to do with preparing society to think it would have a better future with technology. This is the thing I'm really super worried about. And that, because if the world thinks the future's not going to be better, that's like when people riot and revolt, okay? They're like, I got to find something else. I want socialism. I don't want democracy. And then the third thing was around inclusion, because again, I really believe that the most diverse workforce gives you the best products. And so I said, I believe those three things. So like one of the things I spoke out on was the bathroom bills, this was one of the states, by the way. Texas was one, North Carolina was one, your governor was one, well, not you're not all from here, but that I had spoke to about this, and he said, oh, it's very good points, talk to these other people. I'm like, super. So we landed a lot of people here, and what way to move an issue forward, and why did I pick that one? Again, I couldn't do them all, but it was a sign of whether people felt comfortable coming to work, right? They said, I'm not going to feel comfortable here if that law's in place. And so we decided to use that one to make a stand. It was a stand about inclusivity is what we were doing. And so I always said there's a framework. I know that may sound so obvious, but to me that was the best way and is the best way for a CEO out there. You got to pick your wars and always focus on the policy, not the politics. I can remember when President Trump came in, and I was on his strategic policy board. Okay, a big company with 400,000 people, you have half of them think that's a good idea, and the other half think that's a bad idea. And I heard from all of them. And I can remember penning a long letter to them saying, look, every person in my role has engaged with every US president since Woodrow Wilson. If you're not there, you can't impact something to happen. And there would be many positive things we were able to impact. So I'm also a true believer in policy over politics.
Ginni, there does seem to be a shift in the landscape in recent years whereby, business used to have the ability to, as you did with the bathroom bills, have a productive conversation with lawmakers. And what we've seen in recent months and years is that some of the progressive policies that businesses are embracing, and you were on the cover of Fortune magazine when the Business Roundtable announced its statement of purpose and said that the purpose of a corporation is to serve multiple stakeholders, not just shareholders. That kind of message is now ringing false with a lot of lawmakers, and they're pushing back on ESG. They're pushing back on what they consider sort of quote unquote woke capitalism. Has business overplayed its hand?
Okay, I don't think so. This is another thing I have always felt. Like, you may have never read this version of Fortune, but there was a group of all the business, 200 big companies in America. It's existed forever. And it just restated this idea of the purpose of a corporation, just as Stephanie said. I gotta be honest, when we did it, no one thought this was like profound news. I think everyone who's been around thought, well, the only reason you can stay around as a company is if you pay some attention to your customers, as well as your shareholders, as well as your community, as well as your business partners, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't, we were a company way over 100 years, and I'm like, hey, society can decide you should no longer exist. So they revoke your license just as easy as they give it to you. So this is common sense. So we do this, and it turns into a big media thing, which we're kind of really surprised at, all of us. And the reason I answer that partly to Stephanie's question on, what does business feel now? I was with a whole group of my colleagues last weekend. I don't think it's changing what anybody's doing. Back to politics versus policy. Politics are black and white, unfortunately, today. Media can be black and white, unfortunately, today. All of you and me, we got to live in the gray all the time. We don't get to live in that black and white world. So I feel like it's written one way. Now, I do feel like what companies are doing is they're maybe not talking about it as much, but I don't think it's changing what they're doing. So whether it's the environment, social policies, they're thinking twice about how they frame it because they're like, nobody wants to be on the cover thrown up for these things because it takes them away from focusing on what they do. Right. But I think they're going to carry on, and I'm hopeful. I'm always hopeful that there is going to be a kind of movement back to the center.
We'll talk a little bit more about that because this notion of divisiveness has come up a bunch of times. How can good power help address divisiveness?
Okay, so look, if I left you with one thing today coming to visit us, or me, that I wanted to get across in the book, was this idea of running toward tension and conflict, right? Because I think it's the greatest thing to remove divisiveness out there. And so what do I mean by that? I can remember early on, you might have customers, right? Anybody ever have a customer that asked for a price decrease? Okay. Oh, now that's almost 100%. Okay. You too, even? So
I'm in the media business, Ginni. Come on.
I know. I'm sorry about that. So, okay. I would be around. People go, I'm not going to call him. You call him. You call him. Nobody want to talk. And I watched this from someone else who always volunteered to call the ticked off customer. I thought, this is interesting. So I started watching what they did. Inevitably, I know sometimes it was they didn't like their price, but inevitably there was more to it than that. It was personal. It was they didn't really get what they thought they would out of it. It was maybe they thought it was something else. It was actually they really have to go put their priorities over here. It was actually this. It was that. There'd be 5 other things. And if the person really listened with an intent to learn something, not just like, hey, I got to get through this, I'll start to watch, there'd be another outcome. So I would start to mimic this in what I would do. And I was like, I can learn from this. And to this day, strongest relationships are the ones that started on the worst foot. And so I started to say, hey, when there's trouble, this is good. Something good can come out the other end. Now, like, not batting 100% on this topic, okay, but pretty close. And I would learn it with lawmakers in that if I had to take a stand for or against them, I got nowhere, all right? But there was always something that was a common ground, always. Like, I can't tell you how many times the common ground is jobs when it comes to our lawmakers. They all represent, how did they get in their jobs? Humans voted for them. So it was always about jobs. So I think we have something in common, most of us, with them. And so I would start with that point. And it's just it's a small point, but this idea that if you will run toward those things, you will not get perfect. But I guarantee you will make progress. I guarantee it. It just takes a little bit of courage. You got to do it a few times and do it some more. And most of it comes with this idea of actually listening to learn something instead of just passively listening. The other way it comes is that, like, you get really prepared before you go interact with a conflict. If you are really prepared, what it allows you to do is, in that moment, you can focus on everything that's happening and listen to it and try to figure out what to do. I just see so many times people just waste opportunities to make progress by not doing those things. And so I write a lot about that topic, about how to say, hey, I was just talking, I won't say who, to someone yesterday morning, giving some career advice. I felt so bad. And I said, look, and the problem they're dealing with is like on a scale 1 to 10, it's a 10, okay? So I can't pretend it doesn't exist. And I said to her, look, all I can tell you is, just keep envisioning what it's going to look like on the other side. For one thing, you are going to learn so much. And the dark part's behind you now. I mean, because now it's to get through it, and it's be better on this other end. And fine, well, they want this and this conflict, and I'm like, fine, go into it. And start to turn this to your benefit. So anyways, I feel strongly about this idea that you can really make change in this world. I have been working on, let me just say one other thing, my proof on this, and I give like all these tips, I use it in the power of we, because of all the work on education and skills that I do. Most people think it's impossible to change the education system in this country, any country, and every country has the issues. Slowly but surely, I feel like we've really begun to make changes. And it's an idea of skills first. Hire people for their skills, not just their degree. Half the jobs in our country are over-credentialed. It became easy, for many reasons. Check, college degree required, and they don't require it. And half are over-credentialed. All the good jobs that you could raise a family of 4, I would say 80% of really good jobs fall in this category, that half of them could be re-credentialed, done for skills. So we can come back to that, but it's an example of, I've kind of worked on this a decade, and honestly, I think we're on the verge of a movement to make it happen. Never felt that way a decade ago. So step by step.
Yeah. Well, how did that evolution occur? I mean, you talked about observing your mother, who did not have
an education,
a degree, and but had the ability to learn and skills, and needed access. But you're the vice chairman of Northwestern University. You hire lots of PhDs when you were at IBM. So when did it become clear to you that we needed a major change in the way that we think about hiring?
So a couple things. How many of you ever apprenticed at anything? I got about a third. Okay.
They're all international people.
Okay, well, that is true. Formal apprenticeships, Germany has 19 times more than the US, and Canada 11 times more. So strange to me. But I would reflect on my life and say, God, every new job I had to apprentice under someone, right? There were plenty of times I took jobs and I thought, oh my God, I shouldn't be doing this job. I don't have the skills for it. And apprenticed. So put that thought. I see my mom, I see this idea of apprenticeship. I become CEO, and we can't find cyber people. They're just not there yet. They didn't exist yet. There really wasn't, over 10 years ago now. And so we said, okay, this is serendipity, so sometimes luck plays a role. I get up, I walk in my next meeting, and it's about corporate social responsibility. And it's about one little school in a very depressed neighborhood with a community college, and we decide we're going to give them internships in the summer. These are high school kids. The community college will teach some courses. In parallel, they can get an associate degree, and we'll give them a chance at a job, and we'll give them help on a curriculum. Well, we hire some. And Stephanie's right. We would be 95% graduate, PhD graduate, and university degrees before that. Well, all of a sudden, we hire a few of them, like, these are pretty talented people. I'm remembering my mother. This had nothing to do. They had no access, did not have anything to do with their aptitude. And I think if you think about probably the whole world, it's that way. So I would say, this is not corporate social responsibility anymore. I might be onto something. We may have just found this whole new pool of talent, which, by the way, was mostly underrepresented groups, Black, Hispanic, and others. And fast forward, I won't take you through 10 years, there's now 300 high schools around the world, 150,000 kids coming through. And that's just one little program of ours, a couple hundred companies working on it. Great. I mean, I would have to dispel a lot of bias in the workforce, okay? I won't take you through that whole journey. But maybe not as productive the first 12 to 18 months, but then they were as productive as our college grads. They were more retentive, more loyal, took more future education, and 75% went back and got degrees. There's like nothing wrong with that equation. That is a wonderful equation. And economic opportunity is the greatest thing for people. So I would like see this, and I would be like, oh my God. I mean, so here I'm still early, and it's just kind of my thing. I also learned a lesson that if it's your thing, nobody wants to do your thing. They want to do their thing. So we kind of gave it a name. We called it, at that time, New Collar. Not blue collar, not white collar. I was trying to get all my buddies, every other company to start doing it. And more were doing it. At that time, IBM would eventually rewrite all its job requirements, and only 50% now require a college degree to start. Doesn't mean it doesn't always eventually have to have one. But to start from almost 100%. Took me 5 years to get that done, and a lot of convincing of a workforce. But this to me is a talent strategy for everybody. Then I realized, hey, anybody working, wouldn't you like to be rewarded for your skills, paid for your skills, promoted for your skills? You don't have to be coming from another place. So it became an overall arching talent strategy. And it does change the role of HR, because it's much more build talent, not buy it. And I would also learn buying was not a utopia. You hire people from the outside because they know something really well. Sometimes that means they don't want to learn something new. And in tech, it changes every 3 to 5 years. So this would eventually lead me to what I do today. Just, we can talk about that later, to a moment that I think catalyzed the whole country on this topic.
Yeah. Well, why don't you go ahead and talk about that?
Okay, since I'm there already.
You're already
Yeah, I'm already there. So, well, it was a sad moment, actually. I can remember summer, it was during the year of 2020, in the murder of George Floyd. So every business is in uproar, appropriately. Many people making statements, we're going to do this, pledge that. And if you've never, Ken Frazier, who ran Merck, Ken Chenault ran American Express. Ken had already retired. Two of the senior most black leaders in the country in business. And both dear friends. And I can remember them saying, no, we should do what business does best. It's not about talking, it's about giving people jobs, economic opportunity. And I thought to myself, okay, how are they going to do it? They have the what, I just might be the how to this answer. And it was. It was this idea we ended up I coined it a skills-first movement. Meaning if we could get all the companies in the country, big ones to start, to say, we will change our hiring. And then we're going to go work, and we're going to first focus on black Americans, because, I should have told you this, 65% of Americans do not have a college degree, and 80% of black Americans do not have a college degree. There is no way you solve this problem by telling everybody to go to college. This is never going to happen, and it's not needed. So that led to, we formed an organization called OneTen, 1 million black Americans in 10 years. It's a journey, because you have a lot of biases to get through and a lot of things to change in a culture. But companies like Delta, like Cleveland Clinic, I mean, General Motors, Johnson & Johnson are making great progress. Places that had no intention of hiring anybody without a college degree. And it had just seeped into the culture. And so now I am and so that kind of catalytic moment, as sad as it was, it catalyzed. I think, a movement. So we've hired in the last 2 years, this is our third year, 100,000. So we're hopefully starting to ramp up here. So you've hired 100,000, not we. We didn't hire any. All credit goes to these companies that many of you work for. I mean, it is really hard work to I know what it's like to change the culture, right?
Yeah, well, talk a little bit about how you keep the momentum going for OneTen, because, you know, I think all of us in this room have observed all of those companies that made pledges in the summer of 2020, you know, commitments of money, commitments of resources, and I think that a lot of them have petered out.
Yeah.
And the commitments, you know, are just, you know, press releases.
Yeah, this is a very hard topic. If anybody's tried to do anything for a sustained period of time, right? I mean, a diet, you name it, whatever it is. And I think that the difference on momentum has been, and when we asked members to join, Ken and I, and Charles Phillips, who was with Oracle, is one of the founders, as is Kevin Shearer from Amgen. We said, look, guys, this is going to be a long-term journey, and it must be CEO-led. So please, I don't mean to make that sound like the point is, if the boss doesn't really authentically believe in this topic, that he's going to get a better workforce and make the trade-offs, this is never going to happen for you. And that's why we insisted on it and insisted that they stay with it at least 3 to 5 years, because that's what it's going to take till you can get it go. And you can't look at it as an experiment. It's truly a talent strategy. And by the way, back to your conversation about woke, we just happen to be starting. We are removing the barriers that exist for every single underrepresented group that's out there. And so this isn't like it'll just be, but we just like any startup, we've picked the most important right there issue to start with at the time. And so the momentum has come from this top down, and I think this really good understanding, and the momentum's come from like these wonderful success stories. So Delta Airlines, Ed Bastian did remove the requirement for pilots. Now, it does not mean that you are going to have an unsafe pilot who is not trained. That is not the point. They get training lots of ways, and they can help them finish training in other ways. When Ed removed that, because I would say pilots were the last bastion of purely all white pilots, college degreed. I think he got 1,000 diverse applications the day they did that. And so healthcare, another one of those. And so it is so, you know, you would be so proud of the country and your companies, because I think a more inclusive America is going to be a happier America with more economic opportunity and focusing on the right things, not these divisions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about something else.
Well, I want to keep on this for a second, and it'll lead us to our next topic, which is artificial intelligence. You know a thing or two about it, having helped introduce Watson to the world. But artificial intelligence is another factor in keeping qualified applicants out of jobs because they may not be credentialed. A lot of the tools that HR departments and companies use now to screen applicants immediately toss out people who don't have the right keywords, including a 4-year college degree. So, you know, when you talk about the hard work of having to make change, AI is great, people love it. It can help with efficiencies if you're having to screen, you know, hundreds of job applicants, but at the same time, there's a tool right there that we know is keeping potentially qualified applicants out of the opportunity pool.
Is that a question?
It is a question.
A statement?
Well, how do we fix things like that? And then the second part is, you know, are you ultimately optimistic about AI?
Yeah. Look, I think, let's jump to one. How many people have tried ChatGPT? A very technology literate group. Everybody almost, right? So I'm going to back up what Stephanie said. Well, first off, just quickly dispense with the hiring part. When I say it's hard work to hire for skills first, that means you got to go do things like, hey, AI is only as good at what it's trained on, is what you're quickly learning with ChatGPT. Garbage in, garbage out. And if, by the way, a non-inclusive workforce built it, a non-inclusive answer will come out the other end usually. Or, you know, history will show you certain groups did not get mortgages. Train it with all that history, and those groups will still not get mortgages. I mean, this is very obvious, I think. But therefore, just what you said, you got to go retrain all this stuff or untrain it on these things. And on hiring, we had to change hiring to say you had to have a license to hire differently now, because everything you thought about to say to someone, hey, tell me about the last time you succeeded at X or Y. Well, when you're hiring someone for skills first, they may have never done X or Y yet. So you can't even ask questions that way. And so it would completely change how you manage people when you take them from so many different places. So anyways, that's AI. Now let me jump to where we are now. You said, like, am I optimistic? And I learned so much a decade ago. And I think, Steph, you would agree. I think I took a lot of arrows on AI. AI has been in and out of, they call it its winter, many times in the last 70 years even. And IBM, I would say, brought it out of a winter, for sure, with Jeopardy and Watson. Watson was IBM's founder. But I learned some really important things that I believe are instructive for what we're watching with ChatGPT. So one of the good or bad things we did when we first went into AI, it's in our genetics. Let's work on really hard problems. So we worked on healthcare and oncology. I thought it was very good and noble to do. We would help doctors, we said, not replace them, help. I learned a lot. I watched that this is not a technology issue. This is now a trust and people issue. If the technology was right, 70 to 80% of the time, but not 20. If it's your search, do you care on just a movie to watch? No. If it's your healthcare, I observed people care a lot. Very interesting, the tolerance difference you have based on the kind of problem. So it's my first learning. My second learning, they'd say, well, who trained it? Doctors say, who trained it? We'd say, well, this one fine institution. That's just one institution. How about the rest? I said, well, did you want to train by the internet? No, but I don't necessarily agree with that. Okay, I learned something else. This is about trusting this. And who taught it? Where did the data come from? Then the other thing was they said, you know what? I'm so busy, I don't have time to change how I do my work. And it's true if you've ever seen a doctor, what their life is like. This isn't going to work unless they actually really embrace the technology and change how they work. Another point, got nothing to do with the technology. Then I watched our country, true medical systems, some medical systems in the world, they pay for service, not the outcome. So is there really a financial motivation to get something done better and faster? Really? Not really. Okay, now those are to me really important lessons on AI. It's a people trust issue, and that's what I think we're going to sit with on ChatGPT right now. And so I do dedicate a whole chapter talking about AI and talking about, I've really felt like all of us have, so now it comes to head again because chat is accessible to everyone, right? So it kind of like jumps in your consciousness. And if we don't manage the up and the downside of it right now, I think we're not going to be very happy with the outcome. And it's a shame because there'll be such good positives that could happen. I don't mean just with chat, but with AI. But I believe it should make you do your job better. I think you should own your data, and it should be transparent and understandable, of which a couple of those are not true right now.
But you've been saying this for a decade.
Yeah, I know, but who cares? No one listened, okay? So I'm like either that meant I'm a really poor communicator, and I don't know. It's like everything has its moment when it comes into the consciousness, But I think we have it in our power to control now if AI can come safely into the world. Can we usher in? And so all of you in a company or users, like you have a real role to play. It's like when chat came out, you know what I said? I was sort of sad. I said, I wish. First thing you heard was about kids cheating on tests, right? You and I were meeting our lovely person who's helping us in the back, Alva. Oh, I shouldn't say her name. Lovely gal. And she was saying, yeah, kids, people can write this and use it to write copy for marketing, or cheat on their tests. And that was what everybody wrote about first. I really wished at the time it was released, even if it didn't work 100%, there would have been an app that said, you know what? This app can tell you with some level of confidence that was written with ChatGPT. I mean, it would be watching the ups and the downsides. It's a teeny example. People talk about now about maybe watermarking stuff if it's created with chat, so because it's not all right. So first thing I do is I say to it, my husband's sitting there, and I go, I say, who is Mark Rometty? That's my husband's name. And it comes back and gives me a page and a half about how he ran IBM. I said, oh, interesting. Now he says, again, another time he tells me that it's about time he got credit for all of this. And I said, I'm like, this is pretty basic, okay? Because then I asked who I was, and I got the same answer. And I thought to myself, wow, talk about misinformation. It's so fast. Now it will get better and better. But this idea of upsides and downsides and managing them at the same time to build trust, I hope we don't miss that window here. And it's being talked about enough that I hope maybe we won't. Because, by the way, my comment on education, like within a week, there was a fellow from Princeton or something that was creating apps, and he had like 1 million teachers come to him to say, tell me if this has been created with chat, an app that you can run kids' papers through. But I think that to internalize that if you use it or make it, man, you have an obligation on these things is really the point I was trying to make. And I just happen to work for a company that, because it had been around so long, those values are deep, that they understand that if the customer doesn't trust you, this is not a good place to be, right? And therefore, like when we were building quantum computing, quantum has wonderful, it can do drug discovery, materials, can predict risk, problems that are really hard for regular computers to do. On the other hand, quantum can open every encrypted file you currently have. I would call that a downside. So even though it costs money, we put a lot of money into quantum-proof encryption, knowing that it's kind of like if you were the guy that made the key to a safe that opened every safe, like you should probably make another safe that can't be opened by that key. It's like, I think most of us that have values would think that way. So that is what I really hope gets done now, that a lot of creativity goes into managing the up and the down, and that you think about how it's going to change your and my job for the better. We're talking about how do you feel about it for your industry, Steph? Because yours is like right in the bullseye.
Yeah, I'm a little terrified.
And you're more than, but you're thinking through about what to do, right? As an opportunity to.
Yeah, I think that the news media industry got caught flat-footed by the first wave of the internet, and it is my strong hope that my colleagues and I, are getting ahead of the challenges associated with artificial intelligence as it pertains to search and, getting compensated for our data being used, as you said, own your data. We own the data that the bots are being trained on. How do we make sure that we're getting accredited and compensated?
Yeah. So I think maybe I'm hoping we're going to see a lot of work. So I've written things like this principles of trust and transparency. They were written over a decade ago that said, hey, be careful. This stuff should augment humanity. Don't build it with the intent to replace it. And hey, humans, you can control that. The second thing was that it should be the ownership, and like I said, the third was that be transferable. I thought Henry Kissinger had a very good quote. He said, history has told us when people become very afraid of something, or when they don't understand something, they either have very large growing fear or they revolt. And I don't think that's too far away from how you would think about this.
So many of you have upvoted some questions, so we're going to go to questions from the audience.
Problem for me? I can't see them.
Oh, well, I'll read them aloud.
Okay.
So the top voted, and it's
Wait,
not too late.
Can I tell one funny story
yes.
about my glasses? Because I don't have them. I forgot them in the back. And I can remember, this is one of these unintended consequences. I would be given a talk in IBM, or it was internal. I think it was my first day as CEO. And I get this note from a guy. And I get a lot of notes. And the note says, I notice you take your glasses on and off repeatedly. And then he goes on and tells me like 7 things that could be medically wrong with my eyes out of this, and like all the ways I could solve it. And I go to the head of research, and I'm like, look at this note. And the guy looks at it and goes, yeah, he was one of the inventors of the LASIK. I said, okay, all right. So anyways, so I never did any of the 7, and this is why I cannot see these stupid monitors even. Okay, so go ahead. I can't even tell if you're picking good or bad questions,
well,
okay?
Ginni, as long as you've raised the specter of accessories, I have to ask about the headbands. You've been wearing headbands as long as I've known you.
Does anyone else in the room have a headband?
Does anyone?
Yeah, this is not a business to go into. Okay. Was that one person?
There's one person.
Oh,
you guys can compare notes afterward.
So, people have always had some sort of like thing about these headbands on me, and they think there's like a really good story. I wear them to keep my hair out of my eyes. That is literally the only reason. I think that's what they were made for. So I was wearing them before they were a fashion accessory, which is why mine are not fashionable. But that's it. There's no more to that story.
Well, it's a productivity hack.
It's a productivity aid for some of us.
Okay, so we have a question from Joseph who asks, what qualities are you looking for when you are hiring experienced executives, and how do you evaluate these qualities in a job interview?
Superb question. So, not just even experienced executive, because I got a long history of mistakes on this too. Biggest quality I would look for in anybody is their willingness to learn. I completely changed my view on this. I used to look for expertise, and now I look for a willingness to learn, and the second would be resilience. Because that willingness to learn, and you demonstrate it in so many different ways. I can even tell in the interview if they ask questions. I mean, someone once said, what's the biggest advice you give to someone graduating college? And I said, ask more questions than you have answers. And that would be my biggest, and in the interview, you can pretty well tell. I don't know, what can you answer it too? What do you look for? You've done a lot of hiring.
Well, again, I'm in the business of asking questions, so if people aren't asking questions in the interview...
You find that weird?
I find that very strange, yes.
Yeah. So if they weren't asking them of you...
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly,
yeah.
Right?
Right.
But you'd be surprised how many come and they're like telling you something, right?
Yeah.
And so that, and then this resiliency point. Even with my successor, I always tell him, hey, the reason is you are an Olympic learner. And so this is not just, it's like be a learner. And I really think there's a lot to do in the country as well as to update all this, the way we look at regulations and Social Security and all these things that would reinforce people continuing to learn something new, because we're heading into an era of skills changing so fast, and they're going to happen while you're still in your working life. And that's really hard when people have to change jobs. So it means things like apprenticeships coming back into style and really being supported. It means that higher education loans should not just go to four-year degree people. It should go to anyone trying to get a new credential. I mean, there's a lot of things we could do to reinforce that world of learn, learn, learn.
There's a bunch of questions all related to being a woman in tech and being a woman leader in tech. I'll try to summarize them so that we don't kind of have to repeat ourselves, but I think a lot of the questions were, how did you manage bias along the way, and what's your advice for gaining respect for women in tech?
So I honestly spent a life, I think Stephanie would agree with this, never wanting to talk about this topic.
That's why I didn't bring it up.
Thank you for that. You told 10 other people to put it on the screen. I let them
carry water for me.
And even when I was named CEO, I can remember being told, no interviews. They all want to talk to you about being a woman. Every headline read, first women to run, first woman. No. It was a mistake in retrospect. And so what would my tips be? What worked for me may not work for you. And again, we're kind of, you're a bit younger than me, but we're circa in the same place. And when I was young and I was the only woman in engineering school, I thought to myself, okay, anything I say is going to be remembered here. So that is what led to this compulsive studying, because I was like, hey, I better know what I'm talking about, because they're going to remember when I say it, and I don't really want to look stupid. I would study. And it would lead then to prepare over time. But ironically, what started out as a shield because I was afraid of something, then turned out to be something that gave me confidence. And so when you say in tech, I was just more prepared than the other guy. I would just you'd be surprised how many people, preparation's like the highest form of compliment you can give anything and anyone, and how many people don't. And so then the more prepared you are, back to my earlier point, you can listen in the moment, you can contribute, right? So you found yourself able to contribute. This does not mean, though, along the way, I was told I should lose weight along the way. I was told, I should go to the bars. I was told, and I had no interest in those things. Not in losing weight either, by the way. And so and there was a time I was much heavier. I talk about this in the book only for the reasons that I took care of it myself for my own health, not because people said to me, hey, look around you. all these people look like it differently than you look right now. And they're like, and you should wear more conservative clothes. I was like, I didn't change that either. And I've eventually come to the point to understand that everything I did, it would be personalized and it would be magnified. And with that came upside and downside. So I would try to manage the downside, but then sometimes that's upside, because when you say, people will remember what you did. So you could really get points across. And so my biggest advice, both about knowledge became my confidence, and the other thing I would say, it's a story Stephanie knows because I have told it many times, but this idea about being willing to take risk, and it has a lot to do with that tension story and conflict, and maybe it's a good place even to start to end, is early in my career, every time I get a new job, I would fret, and I would fret, and I would calculate every reason why I was not prepared for that new job, everything I did not know. And I've been married now 43 years, so same husband back then. And sometimes people are like, oh, different husband? No. And he would say to me...
Still not getting credit.
No, still not getting credit, trust me. And he would say to me, he would just watch this, and say, I don't know why you're doing this, okay? But then one time in particular I remember, and it perhaps changed my life on this answer forever. I had been offered a very big job, and the man who offered it to me said, it was his job, he was getting promoted, and he said, I think you should have my role. I said, I am not ready for your role. I would need 2 more years to be ready. He said, I think you should go to the interview. I went to the interview, and the person offered me the job, and I said, I would really like to go home and talk to my husband about it. It's probably circa 80s sometime. And I went home, and Mark listens, and he says, do you think a man would have answered the question that way? Now, I don't mean this in a gender point to the men in the room. His point was, he's like, months, you're going to know this stuff and be ready for something else. He's like, you got to understand growth and comfort will never coexist. And I really internalized that thought that, anytime I was ever going to grow, I would have to feel very uncomfortable. And if you just keep thinking that's good, because then I would start to look for those things. And if I was going to meet you and I was really nervous to meet you, I was like, excellent. This means when it's over, I am going to know more than what I knew before. And I would start to look for it. And then I would take on riskier and riskier positions, because I thought, now remember, I also in my head said, after what I went through as a kid, I have got a bar for bad, and nothing will ever match that bar. So anything bad here is not bad. As long as you have your health, you have your family, it's not bad. And I believe that too. And so that idea of growth and comfort never coexist. I suspect if you ask yourself, when did you ever learn the most? Most people I ask that to would say it's when they felt at risk at something they did. And I would just tell you, if the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. And that has a lot to do, I believe, for men and women, but particularly women who are so, I mean, this is not me. As studies say, they'll look at the 5 things they can't do, and a man might look at the 5 he can do on the same problem and just compare it that way. And even if I would come to watch in the workforce, I'd say, why is our discussion on a man will promote them on their potential, and the woman we want to inspect her experience? It's very strange. And we try to really get that out of our discussion. So I've just become such a strong proponent, it made me start to talk about where we'll end the topic of maybe I should talk about being a woman a little bit. And so while the book is not for women, I do talk a bit about it throughout it. And I said to Stephanie, it's so ironic. 40 years ago, I can remember giving a presentation, and as I left, a man, I thought he was going to ask me a really good question, and he said, I wish my daughter could be here. And I said, here I am, 45 years later. And with the book, I said, I am still surprised even some of my good men friends go, I can't wait to give it to all the women in the company. I say 45 years. How far we've come, yet how far we have to go, right? So maybe a good spot to end.
I just want to thank everybody for being here. I will always remember that growth and comfort will never coexist, and to run toward the tension. Just as a reminder, the book is called Good Power, Leading Positive Change in Our Lives, Work, and World. And Ginni will be signing copies of the book in about half an hour. So thank you, Ginni.
Thank you guys all for coming. Thank you. I just get going.